I, oh my goodness, recording in progress. Okay, there we go. So I spent 20 years in the infantry, and while I was a U.S. Army infantry officer. Actually, the first few years of my time in the service, I was enlisted. And I think that's important because part of the issue I want to bring here, as a former West Virginia state delegate, I was a state delegate, a state representative for 2 terms. I traveled all over the state, and I met really good people from way back in the hollers and up on top of the mountains and everything. And I would talk with them about the future, what they wanted out of life and what they were trying to accomplish with their lives. And a lot of young people would tell me, well, I'm just poor old Bob from back in the holler, and I don't really have any options. And so I think, if I may, I'd like to tell you a little bit about where I come from. I grew up in the deep South in backwoods, South Louisiana. My dad was a Baptist preacher, so of course he didn't make any money. He was also a combat veteran Marine. So that's quite a combination there. Combat veteran Marine who becomes a Baptist preacher. And just for the record, when I was a kid, I told God, I said, I will do anything that you want me to do except be a preacher, serve in the military, or have kids. I don't want any kids. Well, I spent 20 years in the infantry, and I was a jungle missionary in South America, and I have 9 kids. So I guess God just thinks that's pretty funny. But I did grow up very poor in South Louisiana. I didn't know that there were any options for me. I thought that I was going to, grow up to work at the grocery store or whatever job I could find, maybe down at the chemical plant if I got lucky. And it was through the intervention of a few people who kind of grabbed a hold of me and said, man, there's more for you. You can do more. And part of it's going to require an education. Part of it's going to require a lot of hard work. And a lot of it is going to require some character and some focus. But developing that vision was critical to me, actually understanding what was possible and then what I was suited for, and then being able to put those two together. And once again, I did that with a lot of help from teachers, from friends, from people who knew more than I did, because at the beginning, I didn't realize that it was possible to accomplish much from where I started from. And it's critical to me that my friends here in West Virginia specifically understand that just because you're coming from a place that has historically got a depressed economy, not a great deal of opportunity, doesn't mean that there's no opportunity for you. And of course, the folks, the students who are in this program, the fact that you are in this program indicates to me that, and should indicate, I believe, to pretty much everyone, that you are the sort of person who wants to serve, who wants to live a life of service, who wants to do things that are valuable, who is willing to sacrifice, who's willing to work hard, and who wants to do what's right, not just for yourself, but for those around you and for our community. And that is immensely honorable. And I respect you for it, for making that decision and setting that course for yourself. And I want to let you know there's a lot more opportunity out there than you might think there is. So, like I say, I started out South Louisiana, went to public school, went to Louisiana State University, was not planning on going to college, but in Louisiana, the National Guard pays full college tuition. I didn't know that when I enlisted. I actually intended to just enlist on active duty and be a soldier for a while. And I was advised that there was such a thing as the GI Bill, and then went on from there and found out that the Guard in Louisiana actually pays for college tuition. So I joined the Guard, and in the process of doing that, met some guys in the Guard who were in ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps at LSU. So I engaged in ROTC, and that led to a career of 20 years as an infantry officer in the Army. Now, before I became an officer, before I graduated, I studied. I was a medic. I was trained to be a medic, which was kind of interesting. Actually, that was the one job that I did the worst on in my entire time in the service, because basically every time somebody told me something hurt, my response was get up and get back to work. So I wasn't a very good medic. But I also was a counterintelligence agent and an interrogator, and I was trained to speak Spanish and German. And then I got my commission and went back to the infantry. And while I was in the infantry, I made the mistake of letting people know that I could read and write. And so they started asking me to read and write things. That's kind of a joke, picking on my friends in the infantry, because we're generally considered to be not that bright. But because I could figure out fairly complex things, I was given the opportunity to engage in what's called the S3 shop, the staff section 3, which is plans, operations, and training. And while I was there, of course, I got a lot of engagement with intelligence because we work very closely together. And that really started to help me to develop a vision for where I could go with my life. And basically what I was doing was, even as a younger enlisted guy who was working in that staff section, I later became a 3 myself, a battalion S3, and then I was a brigade S3, and I've actually been a chief of operations for what's called a digital liaison element, basically staff experts in a broad range of expertise. And we went to South Korea and helped to ensure that U.S. 8th Army battle plans were meshed with the South Korean 1st and 3rd Army's battle plans back in 2018, when Kim Il-jung was rattling his saber. And the thing is, what I want you to understand here is this guy from backwoods South Louisiana, who didn't see any prospects for himself, didn't even work that hard in high school, because what was I working for? I wasn't going anywhere. But through engaging in worthwhile activities and gaining a little bit of education and interacting with good people who did have a vision for what was out there, I was able to see some things that I didn't think were an option before, and was able to move forward with it. Now, the experience of being engaged was a huge part of it, but also more so than I wanted to admit early on, the formal education was a big part of it too. And I'll get back to that in a couple of minutes if you don't mind. But I was inspired by the good people that I met along the way. One of them was one of my professors. His name was Stuart Irvine. I called him Indiana Irvine because he was a biblical archaeologist. And he was very serious about his work, but not very serious about himself. He didn't take himself too seriously, but the work that he did as an archaeologist and also as a professor was very, very important to him. And the information and the opportunities that he gave to us as students were very obviously important to him. And he engaged us on a lot of levels beyond just throwing a bunch of information at us twice a week in class. And then also I had a young sergeant I worked for when I was a private first class. His name was Bill Cobb. And Bill put everything he had into everything he did. And people like Bill and Dr. Irvine affected me profoundly to understand that whatever I was working at, I had to do as well as I could. Because first of all, because if I was doing something valuable, it merited my best effort. The other thing was, if I gave my best effort, it always turned into more opportunity. And that was not something I understood at the beginning, that part of the outcome of working hard at this particular job, whatever it is, whether it was cleaning the latrines, the bathrooms, or whether it was leading a patrol, if I did it well, I would end up with more opportunities. So that sort of inspiration meant a great deal to me early on, when I thought that I had no opportunity, that my life was always going to be what I had seen before, little bitty town in the backwoods of South Louisiana. Nothing wrong with that. Great people. I loved living there, but I wanted more. I just didn't think there was an opportunity for it. And so as I came to understand that developing a vision, getting a little bit of education, hanging around good people, and working really hard would open doors for me that I didn't even know existed. So I went on from there. I graduated from college, became an officer, became a lieutenant in the Army. served 4 years on active duty, and then I resigned my commission and became a missionary in the jungle in South America. I taught systematic theology and helped start churches and built some social networks that took care of people who were having a really hard time, and ended up adopting a couple of children down there. So my wife and I have 9 kids. 2 of them we adopted from Peru. I had to come back home from Peru, and I went back into the Army after 11 years out. I was out of the Army for 11 years after having served 9 years in. And went back in, and it was a whole new Army. We did everything different. We had whole new weapon systems, whole new tactics. Instead of fighting the Soviets in Eastern Europe, we were fighting terrorists in the Middle East. And I had to learn a lot. And I was 38 years old going back into the Army. It was rough, but I almost immediately was made a company commander and sent to Iraq to work with the 5th Special Forces Group. And the lessons that I learned previously about doing what's right, even when it seems unimportant, even when it's hard, even when it's painful, really paid off in combat, because my men, my soldiers, saw that I would do whatever it took to get the job done, and they followed suit. Now, this is absolutely critical in a situation like combat, because it's the little things that will get you killed. It's the little things that will cause you to fail in the mission. And that's important. We'll come back to that point in just a minute, because the people I'm talking to, you guys right now, with the programs you're engaged in and the direction that you seem to be taking in your life, you are going to end up in some pretty critical situations, high pressure, maybe even dangerous. So we'll get back to that in just a minute. I finished my time in the Army. I got out. I moved to West Virginia because my wife asked me to. I said, I don't really know anybody in West Virginia. She said, well, you know me? I said, yes, ma'am. That's all I need to know. So let's move to West Virginia. And we now live in Berkeley County. And I came here and I was on convalescent leave because I'd been injured in Iraq. So I was on convalescent leave, and just to entertain myself, I went down to Charleston to watch our legislature at work. And while I was down there, I watched them arguing about something that was critically important to me. It doesn't really matter for this discussion what it was, but something that I thought was fairly important. And I sat and listened to them make a joke out of this critically important issue. And I thought about my friends who had given everything they had so that we could maintain our constitutionally founded, democratically formed representative republic where we, the people, are in charge. And they made a joke of it, and it made me angry. And I'm not an angry guy. I mean, I'm the kind of guy who, as long as my parachute opens and nobody's shooting directly at me, I'm okay. Nothing is so bad that you need to get upset about it. Just my perspective on life. It takes me 5 hours to get home from Charleston, and by the time I got home, I still had not been able to get unmad. I was still wound up, which is not normal for me at all. And my wife, Julie, met me at the door, and she asked me what was bothering me. And I told her what had happened. And she said, well, you need to do something about this. I mention all of this because what we're talking about here is the influences that I've had that brought me to where I am. And I want you to understand, like I said earlier, I told God early in my life that there was no way in the world I ever wanted to serve in the military. I never wanted to be a preacher. I never wanted to have any kids. The only reason I didn't tell him I never wanted to be a politician is because it never occurred to me that I might become a politician. That's just how ludicrous the whole concept seemed to me. But when my wife told me that I needed to do something about this, she said, I'm tired of hearing you complain about how these people are misusing their positions, they're taking away from the people they're supposed to be serving, that sort of thing. I'm tired of hearing about it. I want you to do something about it. So I ran for delegate. I ran for state representative. I had no network, didn't really know anybody. I was new to West Virginia, didn't have any money, had no name recognition, but I had a message. And the message was, I will stand up for your natural rights, period, whatever it takes. And I won election and I won re-election. And then in 2020, I ran for governor. So what is the point of telling you all this about me? It's not so I can talk about how cool or interesting I am, because frankly, I'm not, and that's kind of the point. I'm just a guy trying to take care of my kids. You know, I just want to make sure my kids can live a good life. So what's critical to understand here is this opportunity that you are engaging in by taking these classes, by attending Shepherd University, by engaging in these programs is going to open a lot of doors to you, as long as you're willing to engage fully, as long as you're willing to step into those opportunities, and as long as you're willing to give it everything you've got while you're doing it. I don't doubt that any of you are doing that. I have no reason to believe that you're not. I'm just trying to encourage you that it really does work that way. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is my engagement in emergency operations planning, if I may. So when I was working as a 3, one of the things that I learned as an S3, one of the things I learned how to do in the plans and operations shop was to develop operational plans. So there are operational plans, there are tactical plans, there are strategic plans, all this sort of thing there, and they're different for different reasons. But basically, operational plans was sort of my bailiwick. And the reason this is important to me is because it meshes with what you guys are studying. And there was some formal education that went along with it, such as I had to take FEMA classes, I had to do some military education, I had to do some professional education, took some college level courses, and went through a lot of seminars to learn how to do this. And then of course there was the personal engagement in actually doing the job and working with people who knew what they were doing. If I can, I'd like to just give you a little bit of the background on some of the plans that I worked on that I think are pretty critical and were very well done. The big one for me at the beginning was the Louisiana All Hazards Operations Plan. So we wrote this immediately upon receiving the input from what's called the after action reviews, the AARs, from Hurricane Katrina. Now, I know you've all heard about Hurricanes Katrina and Rita and what they did to South Louisiana. And we had a commission that studied all of the documentation. We're talking about videos, we're talking about reports, we're talking about communications logs, everything we could study. We studied these to figure out what had gone right, what had gone wrong, and what we needed to do differently in the future. And then from that, we had to develop an entirely new, what's called an all hazards operations plan. So it's called all hazards. It's called all hazards because a hazard is a situation which might lead to an emergency. Now, an emergency is generally defined as an imminent or ongoing situation which presents serious threat or destruction to a massive destruction of life, private property, or destruction of key critical infrastructure. So it can be imminent or ongoing, but it has to meet one of those 3 criteria. It's gonna kill a lot of people, massive destruction of human life, destroy a lot of private property, or destroy key critical infrastructure. And that can be bridges, that can be chemical plants, it can be, it's really up to your leadership to determine which are the key critical infrastructure elements. But in developing this plan, I learned a whole new way of looking at the world. And of course, like I said, I had to go through certain training and certain education, formal training and formal education to take on the job. But in doing the job, I was trained to see the world in a completely different way that allowed me to take assets that belong to civilian agencies, that belong to military agencies, that belong to NGOs, non-government organizations, and to apply them most effectively, apply their capabilities most effectively to the situation that was ongoing. So we rewrote the All Hazards Operations Plan. It's been used as a basis for the plans for, I believe, 27 other states. I could be off on that, but it's over 25 other states have used the plan that we wrote in 2008, 2009. We rewrote that, or 2007, 2008. and they have used it to build their plans. And of course, they don't write the exact same plan because they're a different state with different capabilities, different issues. But all hazards refers to weather events, terrorist attacks, chemical plant explosions, train derailments, floods, fires, snowstorms, whatever you might have an issue with. I got to tell you, in South Louisiana, we rarely had a big issue with snowstorms, but we had a lot of floods going on. And in 2016, when we had the big Elk River flood down in the south central part of the state, it was stunning to me because I had worked a lot of floods in Louisiana. And in Louisiana, you can watch the water rising. I mean, you can just go down and look at the river and the water's coming up. And then when it comes up above the level of the river, you can actually see it creeping toward your house because the land is basically flat. But when I saw houses that had been washed off the side of the mountain into the river and were floating down the river, I was stunned. And so the thing is, you've got to have this plan that's built to bring every agency in to apply their capabilities as effectively as possible against the hazards that you're dealing with, where it's a flood or a fire or whatever it is. And of course, your assets don't really change. So, no matter what the issue is that you're dealing with, you still have the same police officers, you still have the same firemen, you still have the same EMTs, you still have the same EOCs, Emergency Operations Center personnel, but your plans have to actually address each one of those. And if I may, I'd like to just give you a quick link to West Virginia's plan, not so we can look at it right now, but so that you can look at it when you get a chance and just see what you think of it. I'm going to post it right here in the comments part, the chat part, if I can get my screen back up. There we go. All right. So I'm just going to post that right here. You can look at that later if you'd like, so you'll have some idea what I'm talking about. So where we're going with this is, you are starting off right now, you're engaged in formal education to learn specific ideas and maybe even some skills. And you've got to keep your mind open to where you can go with that. Now, if you want to engage in emergency operations planning or execution, I really recommend that you look into, let me see here, there are various emergency operations master's programs all over the United States. Some of them you can even do online while you're working at a job. So what I'm getting at is, you might be thinking, well, I'm going to be a police officer, or maybe I'm going to try to go to the FBI, or I want to engage in this sort of investigations. All those are great. Don't get me wrong. But at some point, you're going to get to a point in your career, and I know it's probably hard to think of at this point when you're so young and you're so capable, where your body's kind of beat up. You've been through a lot, and what you need now is you need to use your brain. You need to use all that experience that you've got, but it really helps if you have some formal education to kind of guide your understanding of what's going on in the world and where you can fit in, how you can help out. Like I said, there are a lot of schools in the United States that offer a master's in emergency operations or emergency operations planning. So you might want to look into those. You can also look into FEMA has what's called NIMS, the National Incident Management System, and they offer training in NIMS. Now, a lot of times, if you get a job in emergency operations, that job will pay for you to get this training, but also, you can enroll in these things. So National Incident Management System, it's critical understanding, because it's not that the federal government is driving everything. It's that all of the various agencies across the country have come together and built this system so that we're all speaking the same language. And it's scalable, so that if there is an issue, an event that occurs on the ground, say, I don't know, a building catches fire, building catches fire in a small town in Southwest West Virginia. You've got an incident, you're going to have an incident commander. It's probably going to be the fire chief or whichever senior fire officer is there. But if that grows, if that fire spreads, with a massive forest fire or something like that, as it goes beyond each level, as it increases in intensity or duration, then you're going to move up a level. And we all need to be speaking the same language, and we all need to understand where we fit into it. So it's really critical that we get that training, that formal education. Now, what you're learning here in this program is how to understand where specific jobs, if I understand correctly, and Dr. Anthony, Dr. Howard Bostic, you can correct me on this, because I might be a little off base with this, but the idea here is to prepare you for a career in law enforcement or in somewhere in the area of jurisprudence, where you're serving the public and you're helping to maintain the peace and to protect people's lives and property and their rights. What I'm saying is, beyond that, there's a bigger picture. And if you start thinking about it now, when the time comes to move into a different area or move to a broader a work experience, a work situation where you're working on a broader level, then you'll understand where you fit into it. It's good to start looking into it right now. So after we wrote the all hazards operations plan for Louisiana, we immediately got tested by Hurricanes Gustav and Ike in 2008. It's like we got done with it, and immediately nature decided to provide us with a test operation. And we executed the largest evacuation in the United States, executed it flawlessly in 2008 as a result of Hurricanes Gustav and Ike. So I also worked in Maryland doing basically the same thing. So when I moved to West Virginia, I was recruited by the Maryland National Guard. And I'm sorry, Dr. Anthony, have I talked too much? Are we in the questions part? Have I gone too long? Okay, thank you. So went to Maryland and was invited to do a similar job with planning emergency operations. And of course, I had to deal with snowstorms all of a sudden. And that was kind of interesting for me. And we built some excellent plans, and we executed them. But really, the one situation that I think was the most difficult for me personally to deal with was the civil unrest in Baltimore, Maryland. And that was because there were Americans there who were severely disappointed with their government, who were profoundly angry about what was going on in their city. And there were others who were profoundly angry about the way that the people who were profoundly angry about their government were behaving. And so you've got neighbors, you've got maybe even families here who are actually committing violence against their neighbors, against local businesses, against other people who are just trying to get by. And we had developed a civil unrest plan as part of all hazards operations plan in Maryland. And it was disturbing for me to see my fellow soldiers in uniform in a major American city dealing with American citizens, rather than, as I had always thought, on the battlefield dealing with foreign invaders or whatever, what have you, like that. And that's in emergency operations, in criminal justice, in civil authority operations. I think that's got to be the most difficult type situation to deal with when you are dealing with your fellow citizens and there is a hostile situation between the two of you. If you're a fireman going in to rescue people from a burning building, everybody's happy to see you. But if you are standing on the line between two sets of citizens, or between a group of citizens and another group of citizens' property, then everything that we know and believe about our society and about our government is being tested at that point. Now, I'm not going to try to give you the answers right here. We don't really have time to discuss that in depth, but I hope that each of you will think about that. We'll put yourself into that position and think about how you might deal with that. So if I can, I'd like to talk real quick about two other sorts of operations that I did in Maryland. Aside from writing the plans, I actually ran the Tactical Operations Center for the Maryland National Guard during snowstorms and a couple of minor floods. I say minor, they were major for the people who lived there, but minor as in they didn't cover a vast territory. One of the things that is really critical about a tactical operations center or an emergency operations center from a civilian perspective is being able to, you have to know the plan, you have to know the situation, and you have to know your capabilities so well that at the drop of a hat, you can apply the assets that you have, the capabilities you have to deal with the issues or the problems that the citizens are having. It's also critical to note that there are emergency powers for the government that are in place in a situation like that, but that doesn't abrogate the rights of the citizens. So it really is more complicated. It's a very complicated situation to operate in. Also, I'd like to mention that I was involved in planning and organizing and running security for the security on the streets, not close in, but vehicle checkpoints and maintaining peace in the streets and being prepared to deal with any sorts of civil or civic uprising or anything like that during the 2017 presidential inauguration. And of course, as a lot of you probably know, we were on tenterhooks about this. There was a lot of concern about what might happen. And we had plans in place to deal with it. And I had a lot of soldiers out on the streets. But their job, at least as much as it was for the police officers, and probably more so, because I think as soldiers in uniform on the streets, we presented a more threatening. Threatening is not really the word I want to give, but not really the image I want to use, but it's more of a concern when there are soldiers on the streets than when there are police officers, because police officers belong there. So we had to be able to do our job and prepare to deal with anything. And at the same time, remember that we were public servants, that we were there to be gracious, to be respectful to everyone, to protect everyone's rights, and at the same time, be prepared to take action if necessary. One of the hardest things for us to do as soldiers was to remember that the local civil authorities were in charge and that we were there to support their operations. I'm not saying that it was difficult on a philosophical level. I'm saying that as we ran operations, I would continuously do what I always did in the Army, which was tell everybody what to do. And invariably somebody would have to say, well, actually, that's our decision. We'll let you know what we need done. But the joint operations, the bringing together various assets, various elements of various government agencies, and having them all work together for the good of the citizens and to protect and uphold the rights of the citizens while ensuring that we can still do our job is a very complex and it can be a very delicate operation. So you have to have the formal education that informs you where you actually fit into that picture. You have to understand what your mission really is. And your mission is not to simply subdue everyone and make them behave the way you want them to. It's a lot more complex than that. And frankly, it's a huge honor to be trusted with that sort of complex and an important mission. If I can, I'd like to talk for just a minute about the specific skills that go into emergency operations management on the supervisory and on the management level, other than just the operators. I don't mean to say just the operators. The operators are the people who are actually doing the job. They're the ones that are out there on the streets making it happen. So the police officers, fire department personnel, the medical personnel, all those folks, they're the ones actually doing the job. But if you're in a supervisor or a management position, you have to have these skills. And once I read off this list of skills, you'll understand that formal education is critical to developing these skills. So give me just a minute here. You have to have a working knowledge of relevant constitutional rules, laws, and regulations. It's not just a matter of being able to do your job. It's not just a matter of being able to go out and subdue a violator and put handcuffs on them and put them in the car and get them and book them into processing. It's far more than that. You have to understand overall how you fit into it. You have to have a good working knowledge of field operations and procedures. So once again, it's not just about that one person you're dealing with, but the overall situation. You have to maintain an overall understanding of the situation and what needs to be done about it. Situation analysis. You have to be able to see what's going on and then figure out where it's leading to so that you can figure out what you need to do about it. You need to have a very good vision of what you're trying to accomplish. And then you need to understand you have a very realistic understanding of what's really going on. And you have to be able to develop a plan to get from here to here. Common operating picture management. What that means is everyone who is operating, because you're all coming from different perspectives. So if you've got National Guard over here, you've got police officers over here, you've got fire department over there, and you've got, there are various other civil agencies who are going to be involved. You've all got your different perspective on what's going on, but you have to understand, each of you has to understand the whole picture. So you've got to share information with each other. You've got to be able to speak to each other. And that's called a common operating picture. Command and control. One of the things that I learned in the NIMS, National Incident Management System, is that anyone from any agency who is qualified can be the incident commander on the scene. And that was very strange to me, because to me, it was very clear whoever wore the same uniform I did and had more shiny stuff on their shirt than I did was the guy in charge. But that's not always the way it works out. When you've got joint civil military operations, you might have some guy in a suit and tie who walks up. You might have a guy who comes up in a pair of khaki shorts and tennis shoes, who's telling you what to do. But the thing is, if he is the guy who has the knowledge, the training, the experience, and the education to pull all of it together and make it happen, he's the guy in charge. Once I worked in an operation where there was a veterinarian who happened to be in charge of a certain operation, and I had to get soldiers to work for her, and I needed to make sure that they understood each other, because she was speaking from her perspective and saying things that made a lot of sense that needed to be done, and the soldiers were coming from their perspective, which is, well, nobody's shooting at me. I'm just going to walk in and do what I need to do. And we had to have various other experts come in and help us to understand. I won't go into what the operation was, but it was very interesting, a lot of fun. But the thing is, you've got to have a flexible enough capacity to analyze the situation. You've got to be able to effectively analyze it and to innovate on how to deal with it, because everything is constantly changing. And you've got to maintain command and control, even when the commander is not someone you're used to working for. The control systems are not what you're used to working with, but you have got to figure out how to work together. Coordination with partner agencies, I've already kind of touched on that. But as a supervisor or a manager of emergency operations, you have got to be able to take your unit, whoever you're responsible for, and organize them to effectively work with the other agencies. Because if you're working against each other, you're not doing anybody any good, and you could actually be costing people lives. There could be citizens out there who desperately need help, and because you're not talking or because you're not coordinating with the right people, you can be costing them the opportunity to survive. So I'm about ready to go into the Q&A if y'all are ready, if anybody has anything for me. But the way that I see this correlating with what you're studying here is that you are learning, based on what I've read of the course titles and descriptions in the criminology and criminal justice education programs, what you are learning is a way of seeing the world, of understanding the situation. You're learning a capacity to develop a situation and to analyze the situation so that you can develop a plan to deal with it, and then to work with partner agencies. Those are all critical elements to actually accomplishing our mission, which is to secure the area and then protect the rights of all the citizens involved. and all of that, when I say it, it sounds easy. It sounds like it's no big deal. It's very clear on a philosophical level. But I tell you what, you get in the middle of it, and it can be very complex, occasionally dangerous, and very stressful. And I really believe that this program that you're in here will prepare you to take on this critical role if it's the direction you want to go with your career. And I'm just grateful to live this close to Shepherd University, where you've developed a program like this, and I really look forward to seeing where it goes. As a matter of fact, this is my last point before I take questions. My 15-year-old daughter is very interested in the criminal justice program there. And I can't wait to get her out there so she can see what y'all are doing. Now, Dr. Anthony, I guess I've run my mouth enough, but if anyone has any questions for me, I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah, anybody feel free. You can either type in the chat, or if you do want to unmute, I do believe you're allowed to freely unmute. I don't have it set. So you can just go ahead and raise your hand. I'll try and get a different view here, gallery view, and I can see anyone raising their hand.
Nobody. Well, that means one of two things. That either means that I bored everybody to death and you're all asleep, or it means that I said so many wonderful things that you can't imagine what could possibly be asked about it, because I just covered it all.
Well, I have questions if people aren't going to ask questions. So
I'd be honored, sir.
I always have questions, right? We'll see if anybody has anything. All right, well, if we can give, I think we can give you a few minutes then to talk. Oh, here we go. What made you want to go back to the military?
Well, I had always wanted to be a soldier. I know that I said that when I was a kid, I told God I wouldn't do that, but quite honestly, once I figured out what the military was all about, I wanted to serve. I always wanted to serve. I always wanted to do something that mattered. What it really comes down to is that I left the Army to become a missionary in the jungle. And while I was living in the jungle, my wife left me. So I had 9 kids, had to figure out how to feed them. So I came back to the United States because I couldn't stay in Peru where I lived. And I had to find a job. And I looked around for a job, and I got a hold of Human Resources Command, and they said they would take me back as a 38-year-old infantry lieutenant and let me get back to work. And I was very grateful for the opportunity. That was actually the trigger that sent me back into the Army, but I'd always loved being a soldier. I loved being a part of a good team of people who were willing to do whatever it took to take care of other people. And that takes different forms at different times, but that was basically who my colleagues were. They were people who were willing to do whatever it took to take care of other people. But I was honored that they allowed me to come back in as old as I was. But it was a great opportunity for me, and it was not what I intended to do initially, but with my family situation, what it was, I was grateful for the opportunity.
All right, great.
Well, April, tell your husband I said whoa, please.
So I guess I'll ask one final question here. I'll let you maybe go a little bit. So you're going to run for governor again. I just found out talking to you earlier.
Yes, sir.
So what have you what are you going to do different this time? I know you didn't really get a fair shake from what I've read in the news stories and everything. It doesn't seem like you got a really a fair shake. What are you going to do this time to challenge the status quo? That's one thing that a lot of what we talk about in sociology is how the status quo can really dictate people's lives and outcomes. And I know your platform, people may not agree with your politics, but your platform is about challenging the status quo. So I'd like to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to have the opportunity. This might sound a little strange to you, but I'm not only running for governor in 2024, but in 2022, I'm running for delegate in South Berkeley County again. So I held this seat for, well, it's not the same seat because they've done redistricting, but basically it's the same geographic region, so the same people. So I'm running for delegate, and then I'll be running for, I am also currently running for governor in 2024. So the first thing that I'm doing differently is that I'm giving myself 3 years to run for governor as opposed to 6 months, which is what I had last time. I was elected as a delegate as a Republican. I was elected twice as a Republican delegate. And then halfway through my second term as delegate, I got in a lot of trouble with the quote party leadership in West Virginia because I challenged the chair of the Republican Party of West Virginia to uphold the Constitution because there didn't seem to be much effort to do that. As a matter of fact, they weren't even doing what they said they would do. And I started off by just sending emails and making phone calls and saying, hey, this is who we say we are. Can we please do this? And she told me very clearly that they didn't want people like me. And I said, fine. And I left the Republican Party and became an independent at the end of 2019, and actually joined what was then the Independent Party and is now known as Americans Coming Together, ACT, which is an active organization here in West Virginia. It's small, but very, very active. And then in January, I endorsed Michael Folk, who you guys might know. He's a Shepherd grad and good guy, lives in Berkeley County, and he was running for governor as a Republican. I endorsed him. I worked pretty hard on his campaign. He didn't win the primary. And Jim Justice was the Republican nominee. And I figured the people of West Virginia deserve better. So I signed up and tried to gather enough signatures in about 4 months to get my name put on the ballot. It took at that time about 7,200 signatures. We fell short. One of the reasons was because we lost a month of signature collecting time because Governor Justice moved the date of the primary, which by the way is unconstitutional, illegal. He did it unilaterally, and he just decided all of a sudden we would have a different primary date than we were supposed to have according to law. And I lost a month of time to collect signatures. So I fell short, ran a signature campaign, a write-in campaign, and actually got over 15,000 votes write-in across the state. Since then, I have tried to encourage the legislature to call a special session to pass legislation to limit the governor's usurped authorities because they're not his. They belong to the people. They belong as exercised through the legislature. But they've allowed Jim Justice to execute mandates that don't have legal backing, having gone through the legislative process. They've effectively allowed him to usurp their authority and to impose demands on the people that they're not legal demands. So in the process of trying to work through the legislature to get the job done, I had no real interest in going back into office. I was working on my PhD, and my intent was to teach this stuff, these things that I've learned at a college level. And it became eminently obvious that I would have to re-engage more effectively. So I decided to run for governor. And you asked what I've done differently. Primarily what I've done is I've got a statewide network of at least 15,000 people now, as opposed to me, my wife, and one of our friends from church starting off in 2020 with 6 months to go and actually engaging at 4 months out. Now we started out 3 years earlier, 3 years before the election, which is in November 2024. And now we've got over 2.5 years to go, and we've got over 15,000 people involved. So I'm not too concerned about gathering enough signatures to get on the ballot. Shouldn't be a problem. I'm sure we'll do it. We'll be on the ballot. But the issue is getting the message out. The message is simple. It's very simple, very straightforward. I hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And that man there, you have to understand, is from it's in the archaic sense, meaning each human creature. So all men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's it. That is my platform. And if elected, I will work my fingers to the bone and sacrifice everything that I have to ensure that my kids can raise their kids in a free, just, prosperous, and secure land under that principle that we're all created equal. that's all that matters to me. Thank you for letting me run my mouth about that. I know that's not what we're here to talk about.
No, that's fine. It was part of your story, so I was going to let you get it and talk about it. So, yeah, we students do have to get to classes, so I am going to end it here. But I do want to thank you very much for talking with us and telling us your story and your experiences. And I'm sure that our department will definitely be in touch with you again.
I'm honored. Thank you, sir. And I hope that I was able to encourage a few people to look down the road and consider what other options they might have as they broaden out their.
Thank you, Marshall. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Howard Bostic.
No
Appreciate it.
problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Y'all take care.